dear Dr. Schöntube, dear brothers and sisters. Thank you for the honor of this invitation and the ability to be able to speak at this most important ecumenical Summer Academy. What does it mean to give witness in times of distress? Listening to the gospel in a European context, and this is my positionality, of course, gifted by the works and traditions of our ancestors in sciences and arts, as you will see in the following images, but also burdened by the sins of our fathers and mothers, sins of colonialism and anti-Judaism alike. To me, as a public theologian, giving witness means above all three things. Giving witness in word, spreading the word of gospel like Jesus did. Giving witness in deed, as you can see in this painting by Peter Bruegel the Younger, the 7 deeds of mercy, which we should better call the 7 deeds of justice. Feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, giving drink to the thirsty, visiting those imprisoned, caring for the sick, burying the dead, take in the stranger, something that was alluded to in the service just now. And of course, resulting in witness in protest. This photo was taken at a demonstration against the Vietnam War and the napalm bombing in 1969 in Berlin, when protesters of the evangelical student communities were subjected to water cannons by the police. As a public theologian teaching at university, my task is of course predominantly to teach, empower, and reflect. For that reason, I will try to think together with you about what it means to give witness in public. As I'm well aware of issues of contextuality and perspective, implying the need to provincialize Europe, so to speak, I'd like to start my reflection on the significance of the public witness in word, deed, and protest with an example of public debate from my context. A debate in which problems of the global north and south collide and merge, and which mainly happened between 2019 and 2021, but which has sadly never really lost in significance, even though public attention has shifted to the atrocities in Ukraine, Israel, and Gaza. With small notice by the public, the EU has just agreed on Common European Asylum System, CEAS, directed at a homogenization of EU asylum policy and effectively a reduction of asylum seekers, which is quite disputed in humanitarian and faith-based contexts. The main religious groups I will be referring to are, due to my context, Christian churches, in particular the Evangelical Church in Germany, that roughly represents a quarter of the German populace. Taking this example, I will then look at what I understand as dimensions of the phenomena we call the public, and point to an inherent tension in this concept. This will then lead me to the concept of the public proper, which I will suggest to define as a critical term necessarily incorporating difference. In a fourth step, public theology is depicted as a discourse paradigm reacting to changes in the nature of the public over the last 50 years. And finally, I'll try to map some challenges. Firstly, our voyage takes us to the Mediterranean Sea. It is one of the places where worlds and problems collide, resulting in people dying. Migrants fleeing from civil war, political persecution, or economic need, but not eligible for legal ways of entry, try to make the passage from Africa to Europe in an attempt to survive and find a better life. Often, Their need is exploited by human traffickers that take all their money and leave them on rickety boats on the open sea. As the EU has up to this point failed to agree on a common and plausible refugee and migration policy, it has left the countries bordering on the Mediterranean to deal with refugees and other migrants, or has paid countries outside the European Union, North African countries and Turkey predominantly, to do so. Rescue ships putting into port in European harbors are often turned away, and the shipwreck usually happens closer to the African as the European border, and as maritime laws state that rescuers need to put into the port closest to the actual wrecking. Convenient. But high death tolls remain an ongoing atrocity and a moral scandal. Former Protestant Bishop and EKD Council Chairman Heinrich Bedford Strom has publicly declared, "Distress knows no nationality." And a Christian initiative led by the Evangelical Church in Germany has been teaming up with a number of other NGOs, also other faith-based organizations, Muslim ones to name, to equip an additional rescue ship under the hashtag We Send a Ship. This initiative has been noted in all of Europe and spurned a fervent public debate, especially in Germany. While some contend that this is a beacon of humanitarianism, others see this initiative as condonement of human trafficking by the Church. Some, but by no means all of the latter, come from a conservative or even nationalist point of view, and the party in question, the AfD, that you can see on the side on the left, is now close to achieving an electoral majority in the next state elections in Sachsen-Anhalt. In the public debate, a number of controversial normative issues are at stake that concern the understanding of the case itself, but in a wider perspective, also the image of religious groups, the state, and questions of the common good. A number of issues publicly debated in Germany are close to the case in question. Some may and should be solved by getting a clear grip on the facts, but most of them are normative in character. Is sending out rescue ships just an act of mercy and of help to the drowning? Should it be understood as an act of mercy without political implications? Or as an act of protest against the inhumane European policy towards migrants? Or does it involuntarily help human trafficking gangs? Are those making the trip refugees who seek asylum from inhumane circumstances, or migrants contributing to the brain drain in their countries? In a wider perspective, more general questions are also concerned. Is the closing of borders an issue of legitimate national interest, or just another sign of an unbearable global injustice dividing the rich and the poor? What kind of agents are churches as religious groups anyway? Does religion entail morals and politics? And should churches get involved in political issues at all? Or would a withdrawal from the public square be a political statement all in itself? Is there a wall of separation between church and state? And should there be? In this talk, those questions demonstrate the issues that may be publicly debated in a given context. Here, the German one, but to my mind, have a broader significance into what giving public witness entails. I will not take the refugee issues further here, But to my mind, the Church's involvement in the rescue mission is first and foremost a symbolic action of mercy, because we cannot save them all. It's a symbolic act of mercy, the significance of which consists in saving lives, but also in publicly pointing to the ongoing scandal of people drowning in the Mediterranean, an issue that needs to be solved politically, and the solution of which must be urged, but cannot be preempted by religious groups. In my notion of the public, European Enlightenment tradition plays an important part, not the least as Enlightenment was a movement in the German-speaking world carried to a large extent by Protestants, who took the gospel on the truth that will make us free, John 8:32, at face value. Theological and philosophical theorists I relate to, such as Karl Barth, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Immanuel Kant, Jürgen Habermas, Charles Taylor, Nancy Fraser, Dorothee Sölle, Jürgen Moltmann or Wolfgang Huber, but also Desmond Tutu or Bias Nadir, critically draw on that Enlightenment tradition, even though at least the more recent of them are well aware of the darker side of European modernity. This awareness, however, for which I rely on post-colonial theorists like Chakrabarti Spivak, Walter Mignolo, Achille Mbembe or Tinyiko Maluleke, is most important to sketch the challenges a plausible theological concept of the public needs to face. The awareness I've been talking about necessitates a clear concept of the normative dimension of public discourse, but also questions of access and power, and thus an inter- and transdisciplinary take that transcends the boundaries of a strictly dogmatic or exegetical theological perspective. So what I'm trying to do is, if we want to give public witness, we have to understand what the public is. So this is where we're going now. The case I've just presented to you may serve as an example to clarify the notion of the public. I could have also referred to a different example, for instance, the aggressive invasion of the Ukraine by Putin's Russia, which not only invokes questions of peace ethics and law-sustaining force, but also of ecumenical communion, for instance with the Russian Orthodox Church. Or of course, the Gaza war, triggered by Hamas' atrocious terrorist attack on civilians, but rooted in a much deeper conflict and resulting in a war also on civilians in Gaza by the IDF, regarding to which South Africa has filed a genocide case at the International Court of Justice. What we've just considered are the underlying normative issues that are debated in the area of morals and politics. They pertain to what is just, what is merciful, and to the question where which category applies. What concerns the church or any religious group anyway, and who gets to decide such matters? But there's another dimension to the public, as the public usually doesn't simply mean everybody. Thus, there's the question of who takes notice of such a case at all. Many people in Germany will not have ever even noticed this issue, as they are not church members or not interested in politics. Others may not take the different aspects or dimensions of the issues into account, as they are in some way biased or simply too fatigued from work to care, rely on tabloids, Twitter, or other internet channels that report in an often emotionalizing and spectacular way to attract attention. A debate like this mainly touches the circle of well-off and well-educated intellectuals who have access to German and EU-wide journals, some committed church members, and activists. Many of those concerned, in this case migrants and refugees, waiting in Tunisian, Moroccan or Libyan camps and seaports may not even be aware of this debate, let alone take part in it. That brings us to the aspect of power pertaining to what we call the public. As we've just seen, not everybody has the same cultural, social, or simply financial resources to partake in such a debate. Not everybody will be able to make him or herself heard. And the slogan that is very, very important, not only in the South African context, nothing about us without us, is a slogan that often gets overruled by the sheer facts of who commands the public and the media. While migrants and refugees may lack the means to make themselves heard, a large church may not. And if a well-known church leader goes public with such an issue, in a country where the statements of large Christian communities are still sort of appreciated, the media might react. Because in a context like Germany, conflicts in a large Christian church still command some public attention, even if it has lessened. But power is never just innocent. And the question who talks or may talk for whom isn't either. Thus, a commitment like the one depicted, we send a ship, may be seen as advocacy for those in need. But it may also be seen as paternalism. But then, not doing anything might just be cold-hearted neglect. If we take a step back from the concrete case in question, we can generalize a bit and thus get a grip on the concept of public as it pertains to public theology. Am I still understandable, sort of? Okay, thank you. Empirically, we need to notice that there is never only one public, but there are always many publics with different participants and varying rules and languages, so to speak. The articulation of what is seen as important or plausible is for that reason fragmented. And even before the echo chambers of the internet, it was fragmented. Similar issues, how to deal with people seeming foreign and seeking shelter, may be discussed quite differently in a pub in southern Bavaria, Germany, in the parliament of Johannesburg, South Africa, where Dudula movement is at the moment quite vibrant, in a chat room on Facebook, or a town square in Indonesia. As we produce the public by gathering virtually or in co-presence and communicating, we do so in divergent ways. The second aspect we need to be aware of is that in the constitution of the public, or the different publics to be more precise, power is always an issue. The ideas discussed in the Indonesian town square usually are of less consequence as those debated in the South African parliament. Sometimes discussions are prohibited by force, or the practice of nonviolent communication is virtually unknown, an aspect Tinjiko Maluleke has pointed to. In national or global perspective, big media or internet platform corporations or states, for that matter, may act as door wardens. On the internet, those who can employ web designers and technical experts to actively promote their content will have more resonance than those who can't. And of course, the normative issues mentioned above are not debated by angels who have no material interests whatsoever, but by human stakeholders fighting for economic, political, or social success, for their purses, their power, and their causes, and churches are no different. A church that's set up as a large and wealthy organization may well have more impact than a poor one. A political party that's sponsored by billionaires may have more momentum than one that lacks such support. Even wealthy or powerful individuals may make a difference. Thus, empirically, the public, or better, the publics, are always spaces of conflict, in which power is asymmetrically distributed when arguing about what may be seen as the common good. So, should we give up the public at all? Well, I would say no, we can't. We can't trace back, we can't go just into our churches, pray, and have done with it. The concept of a public is a concept that incorporates differences. There are many publics, leading publics and counter-publics. Many communicators are more powerful than others, but what we call the public is always about what is seen as common. And the normative idea of the public, which does play an important part in public theology, delivers an important criterion to criticize fragmentation and the imbalance of power. And claims to universality by particular interests to the benefit of those who are excluded or whose voice is marginalized in such discourses. With the philosopher Immanuel Kant, we may call that concept of the public a regulative idea. It includes differences between a normative and a factual dimension, between plurality and singularity, between equality and inequality, but highlights the common denominator and gives rise to the critique of power and fragmentation. Only if we have a concept of the public where everybody should be able to participate, we have a criterion against the asymmetry of power in the public. And it is the critique of power and fragmentation that informs theological, feminist, and post-colonial critiques from different perspectives, reaching from Karl Barth and Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Dorothee Sölle to Donna Haraway, Walter Mignolo, or Tiniko Maluleke. In a way, the criticism just mentioned turns Enlightenment critique against the blind spots of Enlightenment, and rightly so, giving significance to voices that are now making themselves heard. Nothing about us without us. The idea that people should participate in decisions on the rules that govern them is, of course, an old one. In ancient Israel and many other societies, the gate or village square was the place where meetings and judicial court sessions were held. In ancient China, the official courthouse was such a place. In Greece, the agora, a central place in the city, was the place for public decision. In ancient Rome, it was the forum. However, scope, range, and eligibility of participation varied hugely. In ancient Athens, participation was limited to adult, free male citizens, who made out roughly 1/5 of the populace. Additionally, professional speakers trained in rhetorics and manipulation techniques presented cases and issues to be decided. Still do. In the tradition I come from, the idea of general and universal participation is attributed to Enlightenment times. But of course, Enlightenment tradition had quite large spots. Women or non-Europeans usually weren't considered eligible. But the concept of universal access was eagerly grasped by many of those excluded and turned against Enlightenment theoretics. For instance, in Haiti, and rightly so. Thus, systematically, the concept of the public carries a tension between regulative idea, one public with universal access, processing by means of free deliberation, and the empirical reality, which in turn may be criticized along those lines as being exclusive or unjust in its power distribution. Since the globalized spreading of literacy, mass media, and in the internet, an expansion and intensification of publics has taken place. The term expansion signifies that so many more people than before can participate in all kinds of public displays and discourses globally, having access to ways of life far away. The concept of intensification aims at the fact that with the internet, many more people than before are able to send as well as receive, and thus to produce publics of their own, albeit mediated by corporation or state-based platforms and providers, which of course in turn is a problem. Public theology as a paradigm of discourse reacts to that global expansion and the intensification of the public. Even though deeply contextual, It takes on the challenge presented by the fact that communication about the love of God or the meaning of life devoted to serving one's neighbor isn't just regional anymore, or limited to certain people who preach and others who listen, but that it becomes global and gives much more people the chance to participate actively. And that's, of course, also true for Islam, Buddhism, and so on. At the same time, public theology reacts to the fact that this type of expansion and intensification of the public brings about an increased pluralization in religions and worldviews. In society up to this point, predominantly Christian or Muslim, or like the US Christian, Muslims come to the fore, and people with atheist or agnostic worldviews appear. In others, predominantly Confucian or atheist, like China, Christianity spreads. In countries with diverse religious affiliations, the relations between corresponding groups become more dynamic. And Christians, for instance, in Europe, have to, in Germany better to speak, because Christians in Europe has been Islamic for a long time, but that's a different story. But Christians in Germany have to come to the fore to recognize that they are not the only religious group around. Looking at public theology from a Christian perspective, and I will not go into the different contexts, I will let you have the slides so you can look at that because of time issues. I think my time is drawing short. Very different contexts and very different issues here. Looking at the public and public theology from a Christian perspective, three challenges appear. Firstly, all humans, regardless of gender, ethnicity, creed, are, in a Christian perspective, addressees of the love of the creating and redeeming God in Jesus Christ, and thus endowed with an inalienable human dignity. Everyone, even if he or she has a different creed, is an addressee of God's love. And consequently, the basic right to participate in the communication on and ultimately the making of the rules that govern their lives. This, to my mind, is a consequence of human dignity, that everybody should have a say in things that concern them. As we are called to be holy as God is holy, Christians should direct their efforts at the contribution to a public, and that means many publics, where everybody has the right and gets the opportunity to participate, unless this participation is directed at destroying the public. Thus, the Church, understood not only as a promise we believe in, but also as empirically accessible plural of social movements and even a number of organizations forming a part of civil society, cannot, to my mind, faithfully adhere to Christ's teaching and at the same time only care for the members of its own particular organization in question. There are Christological as well as ecclesiological arguments for Bonhoeffer's contention that the church needs to be a church for others. Secondly, that implies a self-critical perspective. As Christians know about the power of sin, that holds especially true in contexts like mine, where Christianity appeared as Christendom, was deeply involved in struggles for power and needs to face responsibility, as it became guilty of partaking in crimes like anti-Judaism, colonialism, racism, slavery, the discrimination of fellow humans on grounds of religion or gender, or even in the exploitation of the earth itself. Thirdly, to my mind, the lesson taught to Western Christianity in its history pertaining to public theology runs something like this. There are two ways Christian churches may stray from the right path in dealing with the public. And this is informed by post-colonial critique, but in its semantics also by the theology of Karl Barth. One is what Barth called church in excess. As soon as Christians and their churches strive at hegemony in any given public, try to make way for their organization rather than look to the common good in politics, they are on the wrong track. as there is only one Lord, Jesus Christ, and no human may take the Lord's position, and even if he's a minister. That, however, does not mean that Christians should stay away from the public, hiding their witness, or just echo general opinion to curry favor with the public. For that would be church in defect, defecting from the banner of the Lord. The type of witness, public witness required, however, depends on the situation in which it is called for. In oppressive environments, such as the dictatorship of the white minority over the black and colored majority in South Africa, strong statements may be necessary. Thus, not only the Methodists, but also the Dutch Reformed Mission Church in South Africa drafted the Belhar Confession in 1986, rejecting the, quote, separation of people on the grounds of race and color as an obstruction of the ministry of reconciliation in Christ. Thus, the Confessing Church in 1934 drafted the Barmen Declaration, rejecting the totalitarian state's claims in the oppressive situation of a dictatorship of a majority of Germans over a minority of other Germans, and then other people as well. In more participative environments, even if they're less than perfect, like contemporary Germany or contemporary South Africa, churches may enter public debate as particular members of civil society, among others, humbly giving witness and accepting criticism without demonizing it. It may take the form of condoning government measures, as the South African Council of Churches has done in its Christmas message of 2020, where Christians were reminded to wear masks, keep their distance, and even refrain from mega church celebration. And it may take the form of a more critical stance, as the Evangelical Church in Germany has done in entering the debates on the EU refugee policy and calling attention to the situation as an aftermath of European colonialism. To my mind, the Gospel's promise that truth will set us free and Paul's dedication to candor lead Christians to a public theology that does not strive for political hegemony of Christians, but critically engages in public discourse for the common good, protesting situations where people are systematically and effectively excluded from such discourse, and contributes to the production of a public where everybody has a say, regardless, giving witness in word, deed, and protest. Thank you.
I would like to start, coming in front a bit, I would like to start with you, Reverend Julie Holm. You live in a country, I mentioned that already, which seems to be divided between Democrats and Republicans, or you could say between Trumpists and non-Trumpists. And you are also, or live in a country debating its values and foundations with great intensity right now. How would you describe the role of your church, the Protestant United Church of Christ, is playing in this current situation? And what kind of role would you like it to play?
So, hear me? All right. There we go. Yes. We are divided, but and thank you very much for that kind introduction. I'd like to clarify a little. We are not divided in half. About 30% of Americans, maybe a little more some weeks, maybe a little less, are definitely in that Trumpist MAGA camp. And about 30% of us, more or less, are in that progressive liberal camp. But that leaves this big gap in the middle. And those are the folks that are the ones that go back and forth. Those are the folks that don't really trust either end. And those are often the ones that are in pain. And in our churches, especially in churches like mine, I pastor a tiny, tiny rural church. If you are in my workshop today, I have a picture of our church that we took for our recent Penn Central conference, and you can see how truly tiny we are. And in that church, we have members in all of those camps. This division is a problem, not just because there are different opinions, and not just because we are fractured in what we think, but because we have lost trust with each other, because we have lost love for one another. And I see the church as I see us as having two primary goals in this whole situation. One is to rediscover that we are meant to love one another. A few minutes ago, we looked at one another and said, I see God in you. We need to see God in each other because God is there. God is there whether you have a Trump sign on your lawn, or whether you are marching in the Pride Parade, or whether you're just not sure of anything but trying to scrape through a living in a difficult time. God is in you, and we as a church need to remind ourselves in this time of that. And the other thing is that we are called to be witness, as you just so eloquently talked to us. We are called to be witness in this world. We are called to witness for God's love for everyone. We are called to witness and to express the biblical, the moral, the ethical, the theological truths that we have spent so much time learning about and discussing, especially because our church is divided, because we don't have a unified church, and a church which has embraced the government has spoken the loudest, and we have not spoken loud enough the truth as we understand.
Thank you very much for this insight. And also, talking about your congregation, you said we have all those people in our congregation, right? And you said that the first goal is to rediscover that we are meant to love one another, and that goes also for the congregation you're a pastor with. Could you give us an example of how you managed to do that? That's a difficult task, I guess. Or is it easier than I see?
It is a very difficult task. I happened to go to seminary at Howard University, which is a major school for the African American community in the United States. It is called the Black Harvard, and it is a wonderful school. But one of the things they really ingrained in you is you need to speak prophetically. And we do need to speak prophetically. But when we speak prophetically, we need to attend to our audience. And when we speak prophetically to a inner city church in Washington, D.C., that is a very different thing than speaking prophetically. So we need to, in a rural church in central Pennsylvania, and we need to find ways to do that. It is a gentler way of speaking. It is a more invitational way, and it needs to connect with people, because if we speak too brashly, we will just get walls, and nothing will be heard. So I cannot tell you that this migrant, this immigrant, perhaps an illegal immigrant, perhaps not, should be given mercy until I have told you that you should be given mercy too, because you need it too. And I cannot tell you that he is a child of God if I have not told you you are a child of God. So we need to do it gently in the context in which I am, and we need to. It is very hard. It's very hard.
Thank you for your service. Dear Bishop Shabalala, as I said, you are pastor of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Southern Africa and were elected bishop of the Southern Diocese. And this diocese, as I understood, is partly in eSwatini, partly in South Africa. And you're also the chairperson of the Council of the eSwatini Churches, which was founded 50 years ago. Yes. Could you please tell us about this council?
Yeah. Am I audible? Okay. Thank you for this question, and may I also thank the professor for the wonderful presentation, challenging us to think beyond what we have known before. The Council of Swaziland Churches, which is now referred to as the Council of the Swatini Churches, came into existence in 1976, and partly and probably is the main reason for the coming into being of the Council of Swaziland Churches was responding to the infamous June 16 in South Africa, in Soweto in 1976, where we had a number of young people fleeing South Africa into our borders and challenging the church to respond to their needs. And at that time, the founders of the Council of the Swaziland Churches were members of the Swaziland Conference of Churches at the time, which was established in 1929, the oldest ecumenical body in the country. But there were disagreements on the mandate of the church in terms of addressing the needs of people who are seeking asylum, refugees, not only from South Africa, but we also had refugees from Mozambique at that time. So some people within the conference felt that the role of the church was only to preach to them and tell them to repent and then God bless you, go home. Whereas some felt, as a church, we have a responsibility. We must look at the day-to-day needs of these young people in particular, because they will come knocking at the doors of our churches. And now there was a need for a collective response instead of individual denominations responding to them. And so that's how the council came into being then in November 1976. And the mandate of the council was broader, I would say, than it had been when the members were still within the Conference of Churches. And leading there were the Roman Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, and the Lutheran Church. And then others then joined to participate in it was, at the end of the day, mainly the so-called mainline churches that were part of the council as it is now.
This is really interesting for us to hear, because we heard Professor Meireis talking about the refugee issue and how it is discussed in Germany. And you told us now that actually the situation in South Africa, it was an uprising. I think 100 young people, young men and women were killed in these times, is that right? And people fled South Africa, and this was also for you starting point to say we need to speak out, or we need to discuss also with the government, with the civil society here in eSwatini in South Africa, what we as churches do about this. And this was an ecumenical process. So it means to me also that these issues, refugees, are treated in a different way in the different countries. And I wonder today, when you look at council today, and you still speaking out, how does the council's approach differ in Eswatini, where resources and political contexts are so different, and where it might be also much more difficult to have an open discourse? Could you tell us about that? How does it work today for you to have a discourse where it is difficult to have a discourse? How can you reach out to the people?
Yeah, ever since the establishment of the council, I think we have never shied away from social issues. We have addressed injustices, confronted the government, spoken out, issued statements, to a point where there were some years when the government would actually look at us, I don't know, as an opposition, or at one time we even branded a terrorist group, although it was not official. But that's just how the government will look at us against the other, we have got other ecumenical bodies, the Conference of Churches, of course, which I have mentioned, and what is known as the League of African Independent Churches, which is more like your traditionalist churches that embrace the Swazi culture and tradition. They are more close to the monarch, or to royalty, because when they were established in 1946, if I'm not mistaken, they were not wanted by the conference, those churches. They were also not wanted by the British administration at the time. So the King Sobuza, the late King Sobuza said, no, come, I will embrace you. And then he made an unfortunate statement that said, I'll be your synod, I'll be your bishop. And somehow they took that literally. Such that even the current king now, hear some referring to him as the bishop of bishops. But that explains the relationship between the different churches or church groups, to government, to the monarchy, and the Council of Churches always seen as the black sheep in the Christian community by the state. But that has not stopped us, as I've said, it has not stopped us from addressing critical issues, political issues, economic issues, which we do through various trainings that we conduct on human rights issues, on good governance, and also which we do through activities or programs that engage communities, the different churches. We have a number of schools. Probably most of the schools belong to the churches under the Council of Swatini churches. That will be primary schools to secondary or high schools. We provide healthcare services through different institutions, hospitals, and training colleges for nurses. So the member churches of the council do have an impact that is felt by communities through various programs that we run, or the different churches are running, addressing communities. Then, of course, we also interact with your so-called progressive organizations. Eswatini is a country where political parties are not permitted, or they don't have space in contesting power. They are there like pressure groups or civil society groups. So they will always come to or find a place in the Council of Churches where we'll engage with them also. And when there are conflicts, we will also try to go between them and the government and provide programs for reconciliation or platforms for dialogue, which is something that is very difficult because on the side of the government, they will always not be so willing to be part of such dialogues that we will propose.
Thank you very much. Professor Meireis, here in Germany we have a different situation, definitely, as in eSwatini. We don't have to fear when we publicly speak out about our freedom or our lives, maybe also. But anyway, also the church in Germany has to, as you said, has to decide, and it is also maybe more a question of power here, right? So I wonder, what would you say, how should churches decide in Germany which issues to address publicly, and how can this be justified theologically, not just ethically?
How many hours do I have?
You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I think that, am I audible? Yeah. I think that the German situation, in some ways, same but different, resonates with what we've just heard, because a monarch being the head of the synod and being the principal bishop, we had that just up to 1919, when the German emperor was at the same time the head of the most influential and powerful Protestant church in Germany. So, yeah, we know that. It wasn't good, but yeah. So, and the issue of polarization, of course, that's exactly also what is the case, as Catholics as well as Protestants are still roughly half of the population in Germany, even though it's receding. You can say that if the AfD gets to 25% on average in the electorate, there will be 25% of church people, members who are also AfD. So we have that problem too. I think, and then when you talk about church, you have very different levels. You have the grassroots communities. You have the so-called, what's called state churches, which were historically built from the then little dukedoms and princedoms, and then you have some sort of a mainline church joint association, which is the EKD, but that's all mainline. Then you have other churches like evangelical churches, Baptists, Methodists, and so on and so on. And of course, you now have also a lot of Islamic communities who try to navigate this predominantly Christian field. So the issue is quite difficult. What the EKD is doing at this moment, for instance, and I am not. I'm not neutral, as I'm also involved in that stuff. What the EKD is doing is trying to push back against the attempts to cut down on the welfare state. We have the current government is cutting down on the welfare state. The Chancellor has made some remarks which are not especially address those on the lower half of society, expecting them to cut back on everything, and the EKD is trying to push back against that on a political level, but also has to grapple also with the issues that AfD is and which is a party that is actually not very Christian, but when it is Christian, it accuses the EKD and the mainline churches of being just not churches anymore, but being leftist politicians.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, heard that before. Yeah, the Green Dragon is coming and all that Cornwall Alliance, you have that same story. And for many people, and I think there is an issue behind all that, which is also very important. Think about Germany as one of the most prosperous countries in the world. Now, with countries like South Africa, also eSwatini, Brazil, China, Vietnam on the rise, it is clear regarding sustainability that that type of prosperity is probably not generalizable. So we have maybe to downsize. And that is a big problem, and that produces a lot of fears in the populace, because people have the idea, especially those in the middle ground, they have the fear that they will lose what they have. And of course, the right-wing people cash in on that very, very effectively. And that, for that reason, what you said about doing your congregation, trying to approach all of them, and it's not the rich people who are afraid. And who will, I mean, they're financing AFD, but they're not voting AFD. It's the middle people, and that's the problem. And the church still needs to address this, and is grappling with how to address this. I have an idea of how to do that, but that's very difficult and probably not very popular. So, yeah.
Okay, sounds interesting. We will talk about that on another panel. I just, what you said reminded me, we visited as the Berlin Mission some days ago with a church in Sachsen-Anhalt, and the church president of the church, they are really in danger to have a AfD majority at the Landtag, and to have also an AfD reigning in Sachsen-Anhalt. Might be the first one in Germany. But what he told us was, first, sure, we do have a problem here. We realize that we might become a church which is not funded by state anymore, if that will work out. The AfD wants to realize that. But he also said something which gives him hope, and is a good reaction to the AfD. The church realizes we are not alone. We have to make contact to all of the cultural institutions we have in Sachsen-Anhalt. And he said quite self-critically, we didn't do that as much before, because we always thought we are something different. We are not part of this cultural establishment here. And he really said this was not good for us. And we realize right now, when we face this danger of the AfD getting back to us, we realize this is also good for us, realizing we are not something above these other institutions, right? I wonder, just one question, because you mentioned this development in Germany. Because the AfD, to me, seems to criticize also the church, speaking out for others. Mm-hmm. We are the Rainbow Church, taking a stand for LGBTQ+, for people coming, for refugees. This must not be a surprise to us, but is it? How do you think should the churches in Germany speak out against that, or what do you think about that? Or does it surprise you really? I mean, that's the AfD says we are the true Christians and you are only a rainbow. You have a rainbow agenda.
That is sort of a rhetorical question, right? I mean, no, I mean, of course, what we need to do, I think, and one of the things which are important there is doing theology there. I mean, Christ didn't ask, actually, what's your sexual orientation? Maybe I can help you, or maybe not. No, he didn't, as far as we know. But what he said is, if you're burdened, come. And that was the issue. So we need to do theology. I think that is, I still remember an event at the church meeting, Kirchentag, big national church meeting in Berlin where an AfD member was challenging Bishop Dröge then on the Barmen Declaration and said, well, you have sort of given away the Barmen Declaration and it's a center of Jesus Christ and so on. And then he went into theological debate with her and refuted her point by point. And well, of course, there are stage debates where nobody wants to really listen. That's a different story. But that was a real debate where people listen and so on. And I think we need to do that, especially on the grassroots level. Because if you want people to listen, it's not enough to be high and mighty, hey, I'm a professor and I'm telling you the truth and you better believe it. Because people will say, you know what? What do I care? You know, I see in my neighborhood this and this and this is so. So what we need is to gain trust. And that works on the grassroots level. Trust is being that, oh, you're the person that I can turn to help for. And then I may listen if you say something to me, but that's a different story. So I think that's one of the major issues we need to face. One of the problems, for instance, in Eastern Germany is that the AfD became famous because, or became very important, and also in the Western states too, because they try to assume the image of a carer. I am here, I care. I care for what you're doing, I care for your problems. You see, a multicultural society is not paradise. There's a lot of conflicts that you have to face if you have multicultural societies. They came and said, well, we are here, we care. Everybody else said, well, I can't, I have to do a church and a party meeting. And so, you know, and that's one of the issues. And of course, it's, I'm not saying this lightly, because as Reverend Holm said, it's really difficult. It's not fun. It is not fun. It's very hard, but I think on a grassroots level, this is where, and churches are still one of the institutions that have dependencies in every little town. We still are present, so let's use that. But that of course is easy said as a professor in Berlin, who doesn't have to face the AfD majority in Klein-Kleckersdorf, where people will shower you with hate if you only say as much as, well, Jesus didn't exclude. Oh, you know, so I'm not, you know, I'm not trying to blame anyone. I'm just saying this is really, it is a hard job. It needs to be done, and it needs to be done well.
Thank you very much for an interesting answer to a rhetoric question. And I realized that we talked about trust now a lot, even though it was not the headline of our talk, but trust seems to be important because we said it's important to give witness, but the people need to listen to our witness. If they don't trust us, they won't listen to our witness, right? So we have to build that trust. Bischof Zwanini Shabalala, I wonder, could you tell us, or do you have an idea how that works in eSwatini? How do you build trust in your congregations in eSwatini, Southern Africa?
Yeah, thank you. It's still a difficult thing to manage, but I think first, with a population where over 90% of the people claim to be Christians, and also the way they've actually taken or accepted the Christian faith and the church and the leaders of the church, you would say a majority of the people still listen to the church. So the church still has influence. Church leaders still have a lot of influence. And we have leverage on this in many occasions. And when we did our response to HIV and AIDS, we had to work through and with church leaders because many people would listen to them. not only in their churches, but in the communities where they find themselves. So there was that level of trust by people in society to say, yes, if the pastor or the priest says this, then it must be the right thing. It is unfortunate that today we are in many ways abusing that trust, which then makes people to now start questioning anything that the church says or anything that we do, because they've seen how we've manipulated their obedience, if I may put it that way, to what the church is saying. As much as I would say, through this trust between society and the church, we have been able to do quite a number of things as a church. But I think it was also coming from what we are planting in the society, in the communities as a church, that would make them still want to listen to you even the next day because of the activities that you are doing with the communities. We have, if I make an example of HIV and AIDS again, we have been able to go into communities where there was very high stigma towards people living with HIV, something that of course called for us as a church to also say, yeah, we have been wrong, we have said things that have stigmatized people as churches from our own pulpits, and now we can say that we are wrong, but this is what we think is the right approach. And people would listen to that when we say that. When it comes to the political front, it is only when we continue to do the work that we do that addresses day-to-day needs of people, that then people will take you seriously when you speak about any political issue or addressing something that is done by the government or any wrong that is done by government. People will only listen to you because you are also there with them in their needs. You are also having programs that speak to their day-to-day needs of promoting their livelihoods. So that's how people, it's no longer standing in front of people and speaking and then people say, oh yes, yes, yes. So it's more challenging now, but it is also calling us to be more church, I think. Because being church is not about just speaking, but being present in the situations of the people.
And I really like the example that you were talking about, saying that we took a stand on HIV. We see today was not right and was not guided by the love of Christ. But also this builds bridges, I guess, and this is also a momentum where you gain trust, I guess, because also you as a church need to realize we are not a church who talks to the people saying what is correct, but also taking ourselves into account that we are sinners, so to say, and we make mistakes. Thank you for that example. From that time, Jesus began to preach and to say, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. The evangelist Matthew tells us the message, this message of God's kingdom at hand, stands at the very beginning of Jesus' preaching. And dear Reverend Holm, looking at the world as it is today, looking at the churches, what does this message mean to you? Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand.
Well, one thing I want to point out is that Jesus did not say, the kingdom of heaven is at hand, standing in the governor's palace in Jerusalem. He said it on a hill outside of backwater town at the north end of the of the Sea of Galilee. The kingdom of heaven, we use the word kingdom or we use the word reign, and it probably is not the best word because in our minds, it involves us in governmental, political, partisan bodies. And the kingdom of heaven is that community of society which is the people. And I think we need to go to the people to find the kingdom of heaven. Surely we need to interact with our governments, we need to write to Congress, we need to do all of that. But we need to go to our people. We've talked a lot today about how we as the church should act and speak and witness. But we also need to hear. We also need to connect with the people of God, the body of Christ that is the people, the kingdom of God that is the people. We need to hear their stories. One thing that has happened in our division is that both sides have grabbed fear and hate and caricatures of one another, so that on the right, for example, we are told that the left wants to make everyone trans and wants to open our borders and let terrorists in. But on the left, we have caricatures too. We look at the right and we think they could not possibly believe that if they were not stupid. And we try to inspire in each other fear and hate, and that is the wrong thing. What we need to do, and it is time to, is to go and listen, to hear the stories, and to understand the struggles, and to reach out in those. When we speak, we need to take those struggles, and we need to be, you were talking about being theological. We not only need to be theological, we need to be deeply, deeply biblical. Because especially when we are talking about the church that is sometimes inspiring disconnect with us, that is speaking out falsehoods about us, we need to go from that biblical truth and express our truth. And I think I got off topic, and I apologize.
And also, dear Bishop Shabalala, I would like to ask you this question. What does it mean to you, actually, in your context, repent? The kingdom of heaven is at hand. Would you like to tell us or add something?
Yeah, thank you. Coming from a kingdom myself, the kingdom of eSwatini, first it is not easy to align myself with the concept of the kingdom of God. If I'm thinking from my experience in a kingdom where the majority of the people are living in abject poverty, in a kingdom where the king, who claims to own everything, including the human beings in the country, has little or no interest on the well-being of the people, where there are oppressive laws, and where there's a lot of social and political conflict, where the rich are rich and the poor are poorer, the gap between the rich and poor is so wide, then you try to understand or to speak to somebody in that context about the kingdom. First, it makes it a bit, you will be a bit uneasy to say what exactly you're talking about. But the part where it says repent, for it is, I think it challenges us as a church in eSwatini to really understand God and his reign or rule over us against what we see from a monarch that is ruling a country, against and also trying to understand the basic principles of a kingdom, even in terms of our own human understanding, and also in our tradition as people of Eswatini. What was the understanding of a king who comes in as an extension of the role of ancestors with the interest of the people at heart, who is also accountable to a higher being. And that's the understanding from a traditional point of view, which would then make the king not to do as he wishes, because he's also answerable to a higher body. So if that's why then I'm saying it challenges us to speak about that and then say, what is the purpose of a kingdom in the first place? It is for the well-being of the people. And the kingdom of God is there for us to live life to its fullest now and in the coming world. And if we understand it like that, then we are able to speak about the kingdom of God in a kingdom that is not just.
Thank you very much. And this reflects to me, as when I hear you answering you two, this reflects very well with what you said, Julie, because you both said the sentence we could hear as something we as churches promote and telling the people we are here, we are kind, we are part of this kingdom. But you didn't say that. As I understood you, you said this criticizes us, right? You, Julie, said we need to go out and listen to the people, and we also need to realize that also those people we consider as foes or enemies are in the image of God and also are part of this kingdom. And you said coming or living in a kingdom, this also might be criticizing what we have in Eswatini, or what could be a problem in Eswatini, that the king of Eswatini thinks I can do what I want. But that's not what the saying means. It means actually that we are criticized by this idea of a kingdom being at hand. Yes, thank you very much. We're coming to the end of this panel, and you listened a lot today. Thank you very much for your patience and for being awake and with us. We have one last question, and I would like to answer that question, and that you're here to question as a panel. One last question from me, one sentence as an answer. What gives you hope? All of you. Maybe Julie, you may start.
Being last night in such wonderful, worshipful space where walls have fallen down.
The idea of a kingdom of the heavens or of God was always a counter-narrative. Was always a counter-narrative because in antiquity, all the kings and dukes called themselves oyagetes, benefactors of the people, but they weren't. So it's a counter-narrative, and this gives me hope.
Yeah, I think what gives me hope is that God is still God, and His word has not changed. And if I go back to Him and to His word, I can still trust in His promises.
Dear audience, we have now 18 minutes to for you to ask questions. And we have also a microphone, or my microphone, I guess. And Susanne Völz, you see her. She might hand you over the microphone. If you just would raise your hand if you have a question.
Hello, my name is Grant, and I've got a question about the AfD in Eastern Germany. I think one of the problems actually is that the churches, like the people of the congregations are getting older and have problems to get younger people in. And that's why the church, the influence of the churches is getting smaller. And I was just wondering, in America or in Swaziland, I'm sorry, I always forget the new name. How is it the Christian people, are they growing, the Christian congregations, are they growing, are they getting younger, or are they getting as old as in Germany?
Yes. Part of the answer is I don't know. Where I am, in the context that I am, congregations have for many, many years been getting smaller and older. I think I have two people who are still employed. Everyone else is retired in my church. I have one member who is almost 100 years old. We are getting older, and that provides its own challenges. And one of the things that I find myself needing to do is to find ways in which these older people can continue to be involved. We can't go to some town and do mission and paint churches or whatever, some of us are with walkers, but my folks can knit hats and scarves for homeless people in Washington, D.C. and connect with them and hear the stories of the homeless people and send their stories out. So it's kind of a constant, this is part of what is not easy. It's kind of a constant challenge for that. On the other hand, there is recently been some evidence that with all of the division and tension, there are some movements growing up. They aren't my church. I'm old, my church is old. We are in one place, but there are younger people that are beginning to come together in new forms of church, in dinner churches, in urban churches, in communities that reflect all of the diversity of those younger people who were raised in the context that is increasingly understanding, and they are a very significant place for hope in the United States. They're just the beginning signs, but I pray for it and hope for it all the time.
I think with us it differs from location to location, and also with the denominations. Most of the traditional churches, you find that young people are not as many, even though we do have quite a number of activities for young people. We have youth organizations or leagues that will have their own programs as a way of encouraging young people to participate also bringing them into services, participating in the running of services on Sundays. You have young people being attracted to that. But generally, you have many young people who are looking for entertainment instead of church. And there are such churches that, well, maybe we will call them populist churches, where they have these mega churches, and they'll have quite a lot of young people coming in there. But in terms of why they are there, in most cases, it's because they just enjoy the music, the dancing. So I would not say we have an older generation, although in some congregations you'll find that. But generally, you still have more young people participating in church activities.
Hello. Adriana Cekic from the Humboldt-University. I am asking this question as a simple Christian, a non-denominational Christian. I'm glad that Professor Meireis has mentioned ecumenical communion, you too, Bishop. So we've heard stories from Africa. We have recently witnessed ecumenical efforts in the Middle East. You have explicitly mentioned, Professor Meireis, excuse me, the communion with the Russian Orthodox Church, or generally with the Orthodoxy. So, I guess my question is to you, Professor Meireis. How do the efforts in the Central Europe, or perhaps even in the United States, look like currently in this direction?
Ecumenically, you mean? The last sentence, I didn't get the last sentence.
If there are any efforts whatsoever, and if any, in what kind of stage are they in this direction of ecumenical communion? Which, by the way, just as a last remark, we just also mentioned younger generations, right? We are also witnessing, I can't speak on behalf of all of my generation, but I think we are witnessing a certain spiritual or religious renewal also in Europe. We are looking for something. And when I talk to the people of my generation, they see the future of religion in the ecumenical form, so less denominational.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Of course, as you are well aware, there are a lot of efforts to have this ecumenical community on very different levels. For instance, of course, the Ecumenical Council of Church, or World Council of Churches, is an ecumenical body, even though that is not always easy. We still have a long way to go. For instance, conversing with Pentecostal communities, which are very, very prominent in Latin America and Africa, of course. We are trying to do that, of course, but and even with, I know from Heinrich Bedford Strom, who's now acting in the Ecumenical Council of Churches, that dialogue with the Russian Church, Orthodox Church, is not given up on. So there's never give up, even though differences are clearly named. The problem I think we have is more, at least in Germany, on the grassroots level, and that is because we relied so long on the emperor to deal with the church, and everybody was kind of forced to be in, either Catholic or Protestant. So people now are saying, "Oh, no emperor anymore. Now we're free. Now we do what we want." And so, of course, there will be a lessening. But should that discourage us? No, it shouldn't. And I think that on an ecumenical level, often people are very hesitant because they still have that structure of, oh, somebody up there is competent to deal with that. A Baptist friend from Munich, an American student, told me, well, there was a mosque opening up 2 houses, 2 blocks from the church, and he said, why not invite those guys for a breakfast? And then the other church people that he asked from the service, he said, well, I don't know. The minister should do that, or don't we have people for that at the church? And this grassroots spirit is something that we have to rediscover. I think, especially in Germany, with that tradition, also ecumenically.
Yeah, you wanted to know about the USA. So, in the USA, it is very split. And that is because we are not a church, but a fragmented church. You may have heard in the news that the government decided that they were going to drop some 200 churches from the list of approved churches for the military. I will point out that one of the churches dropped was the United Church of Christ. Or perhaps we are subsumed now into the Reformed Church. But, so there are certainly a side of the church, an evangelical, a more state-centered. We officially have separation of church and state, but there has certainly been a movement from our government and on the right to combine them. In the United Church of Christ itself, part of who we are is united and uniting. And we, as part of the work we do, are always reaching out to our brothers and sisters. And this means that in addition to my own United Church of Christ folks, my church also includes Evangelical Lutheran, the ELCA members. It means that I belong to a ministerium of mainline Protestants that during the year have worship services around, and to another ministerium which includes, yes, those people on the right who are leading churches that believe that I should not be a pastor because I am the wrong gender, and yet still we seek to worship together. And it means that in State College we have interfaith groups where I have been to iftars, we have been and invited people in. My church is way out of State College, some 20 or 30 miles. It's like being in Potsdam almost. So we are not as involved there, but we have been in the past, and we continue those connections. And we are always working on inviting the other in, both procedurally in statements of full communion, Kirchengemeinschaft, things like that, and also in our local areas. That's my United Church of Christ, and most mainline churches, not all of American Christianity.
Thank you very much. We have one more question there. Thank you.
I have heard the grassroots approach of we have to listen to one another's fears and stories. And I have a massive stomach ache with that approach, because since 2015 I've heard we have to listen to the fears and sorrows of those people who vote for AFD. And I've never heard with the same but the same force said we have to listen to the fears of migrants, of people who are altogether discriminated against, groups that are, from my view, their fears are much more real and actually life-threatening. So, to me, this is kind of a disconnect and maybe a question on, I do understand that people don't listen if we don't take them seriously. But on the same page, how do we do this without centering these beliefs that are so threatening to so many people?
Thank you. Lisa Sinalta from Potsdam, also.
Yes, Potsdam.
And responsible there for the refugees. And
Yes.
Thank you for that question. And you, Tarek, you wanted to answer? Yeah.
If I may. Yes, of course we should center those. I mean, both things should not be played out against each other. Centering on the fears of the most vulnerable is, of course, what Jesus tells us to do. So that's the point, first of all. But it's on a different level. We still have to gain trust of people in a democratic society. So that is not something that can be just played out against each other, I think. And if I talk to people, I'm an upwardly social mobile person, so I'm a first generation academic. And with all my relatives and so on, I find those kinds of people who are afraid and so on. And if I talk to them as a professor, they will not listen, but they still know, of course, what I'm standing for. So yes, you have to do both, of course. And it cannot be played out against each other. And publicly, I think we also have to be honest. And this is the second part of the strategy, apart from the grassroots strategy. I think we have to be honest in saying, well, this type, for a long time, not only in Germany but worldwide, the story of economic growth was a story that effectively helped to mitigate social conflict. Because everybody could dream of, well, my children will be better off than I am. And it was also effective. If you look at, for instance, child mortality, even in countries like Sudan, they went down during the last century enormously. So that story worked. But it has come to an end because resources are dwindling and so on. So now we have to make ourselves honest and say, well, the most prosperous will have to cut down first. And that means we don't have win-win anymore, so the justice question is back on the agenda. And it is not, and as things go at this moment, it will be the lower half of society who will have to bear the brunt, and this is why they're afraid. And so what can we do? Well, the upper echelons of society need to cut down first and make a show of it. To make, it's not so terrible. You can do it, and we start. And in the churches, we will have to start, first of all. We have good reasons to, because we are dwindling too. So resources are getting more scarce. Where do we invest them? And who will go first and showing that no, it's not about being enormously prosperous, which makes the gospel work, and not make this a lie by only telling that to those who are poor anyway, but tell that to those who are well off. And fulfillment comes from love of the neighbor and love of God, and not from driving an SUV or 2 or 3. And so it's the upper echelons of society we need to address as churches, and we have to go first. I mean, we are gathered here, most of us are also at least academically educated, pretty well off than most. So we have to start with us at that point.
Thank you. Just a second. When I wonder how to translate this question to your context in eSwatini, and you would like to answer to that now, I think it's about also taking a stand and also listening to other people. But you had an idea about this. I would like you to answer Bishop Shabalala on that question. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I think we have undermined grassroots theologies. And also in the sphere of ecumenism, we have undermined local ecumenism. In our case in Eswatini, I think we live more local ecumenism in the communities. And you see that always with the collaboration amongst churches, different religious groups at a community level for whatever activity, be it a funeral, a wedding, or whatever community development. You will see people coming from different churches working together. But the higher you go, that's where then the divisions will start as you go up, because people now will start taking certain positions. Whereas those people on the ground, for them, they are Christians, and they are responding to a need as Christians together, without saying you are Lutheran, you are Anglican, you are what. And I think that's where we have lost it. Personally, I've grown up thinking, and I still believe it even now, that my own father was the greatest theologians I could learn from. As an evangelist in the church, working at grassroots level, but being able to work with different churches. And I think that's where I learned also ecumenism at that level as I was growing up, because he was able to work with everyone around him. Even, may God rest his soul, he just passed on a few months back. But at his funeral, everyone was talking about him bringing together churches. Something that those of us who think we are educated and what could not do, but at that lower level, he was able to do quite a lot, including building schools and so forth, at that lower level. So I think we should maybe ask the professors to assist us to develop grassroots theologies.
Julie, did you want to say anything? Yeah.
I'm very much agree with Torsten. This needs to be both and. Although I would go at it by a different route, and I would say that Christ came that we might have life abundantly. And I think we need to get to a realization that there is an abundant life for us, so that we are less tempted to constrict into ourselves and to build our individual little castles, and more to live in sharing. Maybe spend some time looking at that early church in Acts and things like that, as to how can we. They were not agreed. They did not all have the same opinions, and yet they achieved a unity in that. I would also say that while it is extremely critical that I hear your opinion so that you can trust me, it is also important for me to be authentic in my story, to share my story. There is a Jewish concept of humility that says we are to take up the space that is there for us, which for someone who is privileged, I may take up naturally more space than I should. But someone who is marginalized may be needed to be given more space. And I think that is an address we have to take. But it has to be a both and. We cannot just say, we are going to center you now. We need to be together in all this.
Thank you very much. Dear Reverend Julie Holm, dear Bischof Zwanini Shabalala, dear Professor Meireis, thank you very much for giving us broad insight into the countries you're working in, the churches you're working for. Thank you very much. Thank you also very much for reminding us that to use the ecumenical communion and also the question of where to take a stand, where to listen is very important. We need to learn. We are not done yet. We will discuss on, and I'm happy about that. And I have a small gift for you before I hand over to my colleague. Just to remind you of us, also Berliner Mission.